Hello, and thanks for reviewing the following presentation given during the 2020 Data Science Symposium webinar series. The Data Science Symposium is one of several services provided by the University of Cincinnati's Center for Business Analytics, a part of the Lindner College of Business. Through leadership forums, student projects, public education events, including the Data Science Symposium and the Analytics Summit this spring, as well as professional development courses, the Center provides businesses and organizations with game-changing capabilities to drive analytics for competitive advantage, regardless of size or type of organization you represent. For more information about the Center, including how to join our 25 member organizations and the benefits they enjoy, please contact either myself or Dr. Michael Fry here at UC. Now, enjoy the following presentation. Dr. Fisher is the UPS Professor of Operations, Information, and Decisions at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. He's also the co-director of the Fishman-Davidson Center for Service and Operations Management. Dr. Fisher's research is focused on supply chain management, spanning problems from private truck fleet scheduling and supply chain management for hard-to-predict fashion products, and a scientific approach to retailing. Dr. Fisher has been a consultant to many Fortune 500 companies over his career, and if you look at the list on his CV, it is truly outstanding, the number of companies that he's had an influencing impact on over his long career. So Marshall, you're going to talk about social media and influencing forecasting models in the clothing industry. Certainly anything having to do with fashion in these last 8 months and trying to predict anything and where things are going is pretty much been turned on its head. Are you going to be addressing some of that in your talk? And what are some of the influences there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. It's not just fashion apparel, which was always unpredictable, but who would have thought you couldn't predict demand for toilet paper?
Yeah.
Yeah, arguably the most predictable thing in the world. So first of all, good to be here. I've done a few of these in person at the University of Cincinnati. I've got my
nice
to prove it. And you mentioned P&G. The summer between my junior and senior year in college, I worked in the Quincy's a suburb of Boston, P&G soap factory. So those are my P&G roots.
Yeah.
So Glenn, should I share my screen now? And
yeah, I'm going to turn it on over to you, and we'll see you on the back end of your presentation. Mike and I are going to be queuing up some questions for you during the discussion. And for those who are watching here, please use the question, the Q&A capability in Zoom here, and fire away some questions, and we'll put them together and have a good discussion with Marshall afterwards. So,
Glenn, you can hear me. Can you?
Yes.
You can see the screen.
And I can see your presentation.
Okay, perfect. So let's take it away. So if we would all agree that the primary purpose of a supply chain is to supply things approximately in the quantity in which they're demanded, I think one thing this pandemic that we're in the midst of is done is to expose the fragility of supply chains. We've seen shortages of mundane stuff like toilet paper to more important sophisticated products like medical equipment. So what I want to do in my talk is walk you through how supply chains work to ensure integrity of supply. What are some of the alternative strategies? And I particularly want to focus on some research I did with a PhD student of mine, Yaron Fu, who now works at Amazon. So the ability of a supply chain to match supply with demand, we can think of resting on 3 pillars: a forecast, inventory that you position against that forecast, and then various aspects of the supply chain flexibility, particularly speed. How long is your lead time? And in principle, these should not be viewed as alternatives, but a collection of ingredients that are used in concert. So for example, if you shorten your lead time, then you have to, the period over which you have to forecast gets shorter. Therefore, your forecasts get more accurate. And therefore, you need less inventory to cover uncertainty in the forecast. So that would be a positive cycle. I would say if you're super good at any one of these, you could rely solely on that ingredient. So forecast, if you've got a highly, highly accurate forecast, toilet paper would have been an example of that. You can have a slow supply chain, relatively little inventory, and still match supply to demand. If your lead time is 1 day, then you don't need much inventory, very accurate forecast, because you're essentially supplying today what you sold yesterday, and you're just supplying things as they sell. The third pure strategy, which we see all too often in practice, is a highly inaccurate forecast, a very long lead time, and then you assure availability with a mountain of inventory. So let's look at that option. Let's see, my deck is not advancing here. There we go. What goes wrong with that is if you supply a lot of inventory, you might have hope of covering demand, but you're going to have a lot of leftover stuff. And the top graph speaks to that. It's a chart that shows data published by the National Retail Federation with end of season markdowns as a percentage of full price sales. Okay. The reason that ends is 1995 is not because I was too lazy to update it, but they stopped publishing the data then because it was too embarrassing. But I've seen anecdotal information that markdowns now as a percentage of the original full price are at least 40%. So the average item is selling at 60 cents on the dollar. Despite that avalanche of inventory, there are results that show, surveys that show that something like 1/3 of customers walk out of stores empty-handed. This is fashion, footwear, and apparel predominantly, because they couldn't find what they came for. That's a pretty astounding number. If you're a $2 billion retailer, it means you're really a $3 billion retailer, but that third of your sales gets left on the table because people couldn't find what they came for, okay? So that's what goes wrong with inventory. The company that's made flexibility famous is Zara. I'm sure you've all heard of them. Ananth Raman and I, starting in the late 90s, did a study of how technology was impacting forecasting supply chains for retailers. We recruited 32 retailers. One of them was Zara. Most of our retailers had lead times, apparel retailers, of 6 to 11 months, super slow. The 3 speed champions are listed there at the top. So Zara, 2 to 3 weeks. I visited them in 1899 before anyone had heard of them, before they were public. And this chart shows that the speed is a competitive advantage because they went from being number 4 on a list of significant apparel retailers to being number 1 in a 10-year period. Okay, so speed helps you. Why does it help you? Is illustrated by this graph. The left panel, this is a retailer that I worked with some colleagues. And if you've got a 6-month lead time, what do? And maybe you've got a 4-month season, you got to predict completely in advance, and you make one single buy, which you hope matches demand. How do you do that? Well, you get a few smart people in a room and they speculate, we think this one's going to sell 100 and this one's going to sell 1,000. So we did that with 4 buyers at this retailer. And the left panel shows each blue dot is the style, color, woman's apparel. The x-axis is what they predicted. The y-axis is actual demand. This was a cataloger, and people usually take a back order, so you know true demand even if you don't have supply. If you buy up front, you would buy approximately 1,000 of all the items shown in that red box. And that's what gets us to the graph we showed before, where a lot of stuff is overstocked and a lot is understocked. Now, if you've got a 2-week lead time, then the right panel shows what the forecasts look like through a simple algorithm. We know historically for this retailer that 11% of their orders were received in the first 2 weeks. So if somebody orders 11, in the first 2 weeks, we're going to predict 100 for the season. And that is an almost perfectly accurate forecast. So it suggests a strategy of buy a little bit up front, enough to cover you through 2 weeks or maybe a little more. Get the first 2 weeks of sales and then buy more. Okay, that's the underlying causal mechanism that supports the Zara model and leads to their spectacular success. Interestingly, it's not a new idea. This is an article. The most significant thing on this slide is the date 1951, written in Harvard Business Review by the guy who headed up merchandising for Abraham and Strauss. They had a single store on Fifth Avenue. His office was on the top floor of the building that store was in, so we could walk down and see the store every day. He was sourcing from 7th Avenue, so he had a 2-block long supply chain. This was all done manually with cards, but he would track sales every day. He would see what's selling, he'd buy more of it. The system worked. What killed that model, I would say, is globalization of supply chains. China recognized 1979, opened up a huge supply of cheap labor and all kinds of products that were labor intensive, apparel and footwear being prominent examples, consumer electronics, moved to China and other Asian countries. And if you look at that graph of markdowns, globalization, if we say started or was heavily driven by recognition of China in 1979, you can see those markdowns going through the roof as lead times went from a few weeks with domestic sourcing to 4 to 6 months with global sourcing. Now, when I visited Zara in 1999, I met with their CEO and I asked what was in retrospect a pretty naive, simplistic question: how are you guys so fast? His response was very interesting. He said, there's nothing magical about what we're doing. You've seen our process. Our equipment is stuff anybody could buy. It's a pretty simple process. What mystifies us is, why is everybody so slow? It's still somewhat of a mystery to me why more retailers have not followed the Zara model, but for the most part, they haven't. The probably biggest reason is you can measure cost. So if your choice is between slow and cheap versus a little more expensive but fast, I think most traditional accounting systems drive you to pick slow and cheap, but because you can't dollarize what's the advantage of speed, okay? There's also kind of a negative reinforcing cycle. If you've got a 6-month lead time, you got to buy everything up front. Looking at sales during the season as they happen week by week, all it does is break your heart because you see what you could have done, but you can't do anything about it. So I would suggest that buyers and retailers' ability to track sales and make sense out of them is kind of atrophied because they don't have the ability to react to those sales, okay? So let's look at forecasting. And I want to start, perhaps some of you saw the movie The Devil Wears Prada. I want to play a little clip from that movie in which Miranda Priestley articulates the sell what you've made model, in which she asserts that the fashion industry can dictate to people what they should buy.
You go to your closet and you select, I don't know, that lumpy blue sweater, for instance, because you're trying to tell the world that you take yourself too seriously to care about what you put on your back. But what you don't know is that that sweater is not just blue, it's not turquoise, it's not lapis, it's actually cerulean. And you're also blithely unaware of the fact that in 2002, Oscar de la Renta did a collection of cerulean gowns. And then I think it was Yves Saint Laurent, wasn't it, who showed cerulean military jackets? I think we need a jacket here. And then cerulean quickly showed up in the collections of 8 different designers. And then it filtered down through the department stores and then trickled on down into some tragic casual corner where you no doubt fished it out of some clearance bin. However, that blue represents millions of dollars and countless jobs. And it's sort of comical how you think that you've made a choice that exempts you from the fashion industry when in fact you're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room.
Did you ever see such arrogance? So that's the view of some in the apparel industry that have 6-month lead times. It doesn't matter. And perhaps that's one of the reasons more haven't followed the Zara model, because we'll tell the world what to buy. No, Miranda Priestley used Vogue magazine. What that's evolved to are fashion bloggers who tweet about colors. So here's one from H&M, a Swedish apparel retailer, and another blogger. And they're talking not about cerulean, but true blue in this particular case. So Yuran Fu, when she was in the PhD program, came to me and said, you know, what if we use all these fashion blogs to try to predict better what colors are going to sell? Quite frankly, it seemed like a long shot to me, but I said, go for it, Yuran. Well, she did a masterful job. So I'm basically describing what she did. My role was to recruit 3 retailers, 2 apparel retailers, footwear retailer, who produce fashion products. We picked color as a quantifiable attribute, which was important, hard to predict, and we could see whether or not we could use social media to predict color preferences. She collected tweets over a 4-year period from more than 1,300 fashion bloggers. Here's a list of some of those bloggers. Some are like Vogue magazine, and some are actually the brands like Burberry, Tommy Hilfiger, Coach. They were tweeting about color. So true blue, powder pink. This is a lesson in how finely gradations were with color. So you look down at the bottom, who knew there was at least 2 shades of white, optic white and off-white. The heart of what she did was to convert tweets to numbers. So she started by looking at a bag of words that the tweet comprised. She used Mechanical Turk to get 5 people to rate a tweet based on, is it about color in a fashion sense? So blue will be the next hot color versus I feel blue today. Does it apply to apparel or shoes? And then is the sentiment positive, neutral, or negative? So that created a manually quantified sample of tweets that was a training set. And then she used various natural language processing tools to convert a much larger sample of tweets into numeric representation, as indicated here. So it's a tweet about a particular color, and it's either positive, negative, or neutral. Okay. She also captured retweets, favorites, and Google search index, color search index. So 4 numbers: tweet, retweet, favorites, Google search. The first is top down. This is a fashion industry, Miranda Priestley saying cerulean is going to be the hot color. The other three you could view as a kind of market test of a color. You put a tweet out there that says cerulean is going to be hot. The extent to which people retweet that or list it as a favorite is a kind of market test of that color. Okay, so that's step one. Collect an avalanche of data about social media tweets and convert them to a numeric scale. What color is it about? Positive, negative, neutral, okay? Now, that's color used in words. If we want to do analytics, we kind of like numbers. Well, the good news is colors are converted to numbers. There's a couple different schemes, but we use the RGB scale, which is red, green, blue, which is a way to quantify colors projected on a computer screen. We've got 3 guns. What you're looking at now is created by 3 guns on my computer that emit red, green, blue to each pixel on the screen in varying intensities. You set those intensities, you get a color on the screen. The actual words used to describe colors are fairly structured, but not perfectly structured. So she identified 950 word color terms that were used by the industry. She correlated them with their RGB value. Retailers also had their color words, which was a subset of the social media words. And then if there was a social media word outside the retailer's color word, she matched that to the closest of the retailer's color word. So the retailer had a palette of colors, and you could match a social media broadcast to one of those colors in the retailer's palette. So if you saw positive sentiment expressed about a particular color in the retailer's palette, you would think it would sell better, okay? In the upper left panel, Uran is kind of picking fun of us guys, because if you look at our colors, it's pretty pedestrian, whereas women are more nuanced in their color choices, which is the correct way to think about it. So then you see something interesting. Color tweets change over time. So top graph shows retweets. If you look at red, you'll see spike in social media popularity of a particular color, red in this case. You look at sales data, and you also see a spike in popularity of colors during a season. So this is one of the retailers who we worked with. The color gold got hot one season and sold much better than typically it's sold. And you see unit sales of gold shooting up until they stocked out, and then gold fell through the roof, okay? So the interesting question is fluctuations in social media and color preferences, fluctuations in what people are buying. Can we predict the latter by looking at the former, okay? So here's the schema we used with the 3 retailers. Uran collected social media data, codified it, the way I showed you before, predominantly converted to what color is it about, positive, negative, neutral, tweet, retweet, favorites. Used that as an input to the forecasting process at the point in time in which it would be needed to influence the order being placed by the retailer. For the most part, these 3 retailers' lead times were long enough that I think they bought about 75% of their product before seeing any sales. So it wasn't, retailers have a phrase, one and done, which means they buy everything up front. They were not that front-end loaded, but bought most of their stuff early in the season, okay? Now, what was the data? Retail data was sales of various granularities. It was inventory, markdown information, and we focused on items in their product portfolio that came in multiple colors. The social media data were tweets that were relevant to fashion, that had been classified as to sentiment, retweets, favorites, Google search index, okay? Uran used 3 different machine learning tools, Lasso, SVM, Random Forest, at each of the 3 retailers. And she compared 3 types of retailers, 3 types of forecasts. The blue bar is what the retailer actually forecasts themselves through manual methods. Red is a forecast she created without using social media data, but which she couldn't resist trying to be a little smarter than the retailer was in forecasting with the data they had. And then the green bar is her smart forecast combined with social media. Of the 3 techniques, random forests worked the best, okay? So I think the interesting thing to look at on this slide for each of the 3 retailers is the rightmost set of histograms, and you can compare the blue bar with the green bar. And the numbers shown are the mean absolute deviation of forecast versus actual demand, okay? The absolute numbers are not meaningful, but the relative values of the blue bar versus the green bar are meaningful, okay? And it's not like social, I would say the significance of using social media in the way we're describing is significant, but not overwhelming. So it's not like you go from knowing nothing to knowing everything, but there's a material, just eyeballing this, maybe 30% reduction in forecast error, okay? So the question, does it work? Yes, it had an impact. The other, to me, most interesting finding is if you compare the top-down tweets with bottom-up retweets, favorites, Google search index, that's people, everyday folks like us out there in the world expressing our preference about what colors we like. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that's a little bit like a market test of colors. It's not shown on the slide here, but that bottom up was vastly more predictive than top down. So bottom up gave you almost exactly the same forecast accuracy as bottom up plus top down. Some concluding thoughts. Here we go. We talked about 3 tools for a supply chain supplying stuff or supplying what the market needs: accurate forecasts, flexibility, and speed. The world today relies mostly on the inventory lever, and we see that with huge markdowns and really huge mismatch of supply and demand, markdowns plus shortages. Zara, I would say, is a market test that shows that supply chain flexibility is a powerful lever, but somewhat remarkably to me, most retailers have not followed in Zara's footsteps, although I think that's to some extent beginning to happen. And then to the point of this, this event, using analytics, we talked about using social media to improve forecasts. It's a process that attempts to use natural language information to inform a decision. In this case, how much do you buy? And we can think through the process I described, but step 1 is collect that information. In this case, a huge quantity of fashion tweets and the degree to which they were retweeted in favorites, convert it to a number, which is the color it talks about, which has a numeric RGB value associated with it, and is the sentiment positive, neutral, or negative. So there's basically two numbers, an RGB number and a positive, negative, neutral number. We had both top-down, bottom-up. Bottom-up was much more predictive. And then the impact on forecast accuracy was, I would say, meaningful, significant. So that's my message. Perhaps at this point we can open it up to Q&A.